Today we're going to talk about imperialism, in Asia in relation to the West. If you look at this map here, you can notice that there are some color-coded countries. This is dealing with the spheres of influence. So when you take a look at this, you can see British India, French Indochina, the Netherlands, East Indies, the United States, Philippines. So if you take a look, you notice that these countries here are European or American countries that have taken over areas of Asia for competition. So here's your third check for understanding. Complete the items below in your notes. Based off of this image, what do you think, what do you see, and what do you wonder? Make sure you add this check for understanding number here because I will look for it in your notes. So Ms. McCrae is going to give you two clues. This pie is representative of China, and there are some other imperial powers, and there's someone trying to stop it. So take a moment to yourself, and please take a look. Now, spheres of influence. What are the spheres of influence? They are areas where the imperial, like European powers, had exclusive trading rights on certain areas. And China had a sphere of influence. If you look here at this diagram, you can see, and I'm going to scoot it up a little bit, you have Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and Russia that were involved. Now, what's interesting is that the United States is going to be upset that they're not as involved in the spheres of influence in China, and so what they will create is an open door policy. So how did imperialism affect China? European countries had areas of influence in China, and eventually the U.S. felt their trading rights were threatened. So they developed the open door policy. Take a look at this image here. Excellent cartoon or image about imperialism in China. So take a moment to study that. This will pop up again in your future. So the open door policy, what is it? It's America wanted everyone, including Europe and America, to go into China and take natural resources and push imperial motives. Here's the thing though, America really just wanted for America to have rights to China, but they knew that they would have to include the European nations because they were already present. So, what happened with Japan during the age of imperialism is very different than China. China had to succumb or give in to the oppression of imperialism, but Japan has a little bit of a different slogan, and you may want to add this slogan to your notes. Japan said, if you can't beat them, then you have to join them. So they participated in the Meiji Restoration. This is where they wanted to compete and keep up with European or Western nations. Remember, all these European and America are west of Asia, so they want to keep up. They had learned from what they had seen in China that they didn't want to resist fully, or else they may lose their independence. So what they decided to do was become a superpower. And so when you look, they created a European-style government. They industrialized rapidly, and then they used a westernized military. So I'm going to show you some images here. Here's your check for understanding, number 4. Why do you think Japan modernized and lost some of its culture? And one way that you're going to be able to answer this question is I'm going to show you a picture here. Samurai soldiers or warriors were the main military in Japan. Under the Meiji Restoration, they altered themselves, and these soldiers, the samurai, was considered obsolete and no longer needed. So after the restoration, Japan adopted more of a European appearance. So if you look at this uniform here, this is definitely not traditional Japanese appearance or clothing or attire. And they moved and changed their military style to a more Western European. So cannons, guns. They studied with the British to kind of figure out how to create their type of a similar army to protect themselves. So one thing I like to say with Japan is that they were imperialistic. Make sure you take a moment today. And in a few minutes, I'm going to zoom in on this. Pause the screen here and make sure that you read this section right here because it plays into your next check for understanding. So take a moment and pause. Read over this. So your next check for understanding is, what were the 3 accomplishments that made Japan a world power? What countries did Japan take over? If you read the previous paragraph, you'll have answers to that. So, how did Japan establish themselves as an imperialistic power? It was very different for Japan to be considered imperialistic because European countries did see Asian nations as inferior or less than. So the Japanese created a military power. They westernized their military, so they had some structure similar to Europe. And they defeat China and Russia in 2 different wars over territory, but also resources. If you take a look at Japan here in this map, Japan is very small, not a lot of natural resources. So if you want them, you got to take them. So they had the Sino-Japanese War in 1894, the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, okay? And Japan became the most powerful Asian country after they imperialized. So if you look here, these are all the brown will be territories that eventually Japan will take over, and they'll run this into the mid 20th century by 1941. So we'll talk about Africa and Latin America in a moment.